Good morning, and thank you for coming to celebrate International Women's Day, the theme of which this year is Break the Bias, Violence Against Women and Girls, and Anti-Discriminatory Practice. International Women's Day, March the 8th, is a global day celebrating the social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women. The day also marks a call to action for accelerating women's equality. International Women's Day has existed for well over a century, with the first International Women's Day gathering taking place in 1911, supported by over 1 million people. This panel event today is focusing on the safety of women and girls in Hackney and discrimination. The Council is providing the space for agencies to come together to explore issues and highlight work being done to address these issues. We'll be hearing from members of Hackney Council. We have speakers from the Council's Independent Domestic Violence Service, DIAS. We have ICRO, a women's organisation, speakers from the NIA project and from Gallup, and also from the Contextual Intervention Unit and Young Hackney. Some of the subjects we discussed today may be distressing and uncomfortable, so please do access help if needed from the sources linked to the invitation for the event itself, and also the holding slide that you see in front of you. Finally, all of us as panel members are given an undertaking to those watching and to each other that we use language which is respectful of everyone's identities and beliefs, and that no discriminatory or exclusionary language will be allowed. And now I'll hand over to our keynote speaker, Diane. Diane is the director of the London Borough of Hackney Children and Family Service. She will be setting out the importance of International Women's Day, the commitment of Hackney Council to anti-racism practice and addressing violence against women and girls.
Thank you, Selma. Good morning, everyone, and a big thank you for joining us today on International Women's Day. Today is a day when women are recognised for their achievements without regard to division, whether national, ethnic, linguistic, cultural, economical, or political. In 2022, as we celebrate many of our achievements as women, we also hold in mind women around the world who are suffering immensely. War in Europe and around the world focuses our attention on how women face particular risks in times of conflict, from displacement from their homes to sexual violence and violence against women. When we talk about women and girls in today's event, we're also including trans women and girls. The theme of this year's International Women's Day is Break the Bias. The theme acknowledges that inequality has several key components. Inequality is gendered, and male privilege are perverse. Inequality is universal. In every country, there is sexism and misogyny. Inequality is intersectional. Across the world, women and girls suffer greater and more complex discrimination on the grounds of ethnicity, religion, age, sexuality, disability, class, trans status, and immigration status. An unknown quote that echoes for me today is, "Here is strong women. May we know them, may we be them, may we raise them." In Hackney, we have much to be proud of in advancing women's rights. As an employer, we have reversed the gender pay gap. Women on average earn more than men. Our mayor, members, senior leaders, and staff are committed to addressing inequality. We campaign regularly to reach the public with assertive and feminist messages about women's safety and ending male violence. We have deployed and developed an anti-racist agenda and improvement plan that informs our practice across all the services. Although we know how we have much more to achieve and do, domestic abuse continues to be a challenge that we address through strong council and partnership approaches. While women and girls in Hackney are generally safe, we need to continue to focus on making all public spaces safer. the attitudes of boys and girls and men towards male privilege and gender norms is an ongoing area of work that our colleagues in Hackney Education, schools, and Young Hackney are addressing in partnership with young people. As I reflect on today, what it means and signifies to me, it's a day that signifies the power that women hold. It's a day to celebrate and recognise the achievements of women around the world. Today is my daughter's birthday, and I'm very proud to be part of that day that not only celebrates her birthday, but also speaks to a day for women that is empowerment and strength. As we hear from speakers today, I would ask you to reflect on how you, in your work and your personal life, can become part of the change we want to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Our next speaker is Nikki, Deputy Service Manager at the Domestic Abuse Intervention Service, DIAS. Nikki will be speaking to us about the discrimination and barriers faced by domestic abuse victims and survivors who are Black and global majority women, disabled women and others, highlighting the support that's available in Hackney.
Thank you, Selma. Morning, everybody. As said, my name's Nikki and I'm the Deputy Service Manager in DIAS, the Domestic Abuse Intervention Service in Hackney. My colleague was due to speak today and she was planning to enrich the conversations by talking about her own experiences of intersectionalities. Unfortunately, she's off sick, so I've stepped in last minute. I've got some slides to share with you today. They will be made available, so please don't feel like you have to make notes if you don't want to. So let me just get those up for you now. Okay, lovely. So today we're thinking about domestic abuse and the interface that domestic abuse has with intersectionality. And what we wanted to highlight was the fact that certain intersectionalities mean that certain groups of women are more at risk of experiencing domestic abuse and may face additional barriers when trying to access support in relation to domestic abuse. Okay, so firstly, what is domestic abuse? I'm not going to read this slide out to you because you all have it in front of you, but I did just want to highlight a couple of things. So the reason we refer to domestic abuse as domestic abuse and not domestic violence is domestic violence, that sort of term often brings up thoughts of physical violence. And of course, domestic abuse can include physical violence, but domestic abuse is not just physical violence. When we're looking to identify domestic abuse, we're really thinking about identifying patterns of controlling behaviour. So one person trying to control another person using their behaviour. And this can, of course, include physical violence, but this can also include sexual violence. This can also include emotional abuse. This can include financial abuse. This can include spiritual abuse, psychological abuse. This can include restricting a person's access to resources, stopping them seeing their friends, stopping them engaging with the wider community, threatening them, saying, you know, you can't have access to your children. So when we're looking to identify domestic abuse, we're really looking for patterns of controlling behaviour. So I just wanted to sort of everybody to keep that in mind. And also just to highlight that children have now been given statutory recognition as victims of domestic abuse. So children in households where abuse is happening are now seen as victims of domestic abuse. Intersectionality. So we're talking about this a lot today, the way different aspects of people's identity interplay with each other and can lead to people experiencing further discrimination and oppression. So as Diane mentioned, we're thinking about race, we're thinking about gender, we're thinking about class, we're thinking about age, sexual orientation, immigration status, and physical ability. And as previously stated, some of these intersectionalities can mean that people are at greater risk of experiencing domestic abuse and face further barriers when trying to access support around domestic abuse. So for example, a woman who has an uncertain immigration status may find that she is reluctant to access support services because she's concerned about what that might mean and whether or not she might then face deportation. So that's just a very sort of brief example of how intersectionalities kind of play alongside domestic abuse to lead to further discrimination and oppression. This is a more extensive list. Of course, it's not an exhaustive list, but I did want to just take the time to sort of go through the list and touch on all of the different intersectionalities listed here. So first, Black and global majority women, apologies. So they may face additional barriers to accessing support based on discrimination and systemic racism. So for example, a Black woman who is experiencing domestic abuse may be reluctant to report to the police because of the negative experiences she has had of this system, either of not being believed in the past or of being unfairly treated. Equally, she may be reluctant to engage with the legal system because not having the same faith in that system as perhaps her white counterparts. Women with disabilities are more likely to experience domestic abuse than non-disabled people. And if there are communication difficulties, it might be difficult for them to explain to services the abuse that they are experiencing. Women within some cultures may be subjected to what we refer to as honour-based violence. So this is where their culture may dictate that they need to behave a certain way to be considered a good, inverted commas, woman, and levels of shame may be applied to their behaviour in order to make them behave a certain way. They may also be subjected to things such as forced marriage, female genital mutilation, for example, and this can lead to lots and lots of layers of shame being applied to them to make them behave a certain way. LGBTQ+ women may not be out to their friends or families or the wider community, and they may fear that disclosing the abuse that they are experiencing in a same-sex relationship could lead them being outed, inverted commas, to the community. Transgender women. There are fewer tailored services available for transgendered women, and they may encounter discrimination and lack of understanding when trying to access women's services. People who are poor or unemployed may not have the financial support available and feel that they are less able to access services because of lack of finances. For example, hiring a lawyer or fleeing domestic abuse. They may fear, how am I going to pay the rent? How am I going to feed the children? 16 to 17-year-old girls may face additional pressure from peers to stay in relationships where there's gendered abuse. They may also not understand fully what domestic abuse is, so not be able to recognise the abuse that they're experiencing and therefore not be able to articulate it. Older women may find it more difficult to access services. And equally, we often see older women, not often, but we do see the dynamic of older women being abused by their sons and not wanting to report to the police because they don't wish to get their sons in trouble. And this is another dynamic that they face. Women with no recourse to public funds may feel excluded from services due to language barriers. And equally, they may be worried about trying to access support as they're worried that their immigration status will be highlighted to services and they could risk deportation. And lastly, we think about women's additional vulnerabilities, such as mental health difficulties or substance misuse. Again, these may place barriers for women when accessing support, as they may feel that they're less likely to be believed or they're seen as unreliable witnesses in court. So these are just some of the ways that intersectionalities interplay with domestic abuse to mean that women find it difficult either to leave relationships or to access support in the first place. So thinking about how we respond to these difficulties highlighted. So at the Domestic Abuse Intervention Service in Hackney, we're always thinking about how we can respond to these difficulties and tailor our service to try and mitigate some of the difficulties that are raised. And obviously this is an ongoing process and something that we all need to think about continuously. But these are just some of the ways that we found that have worked to ensure that people can access our service. So being client-centered, being curious about people's lived experiences, being anti-racist, inviting, acknowledging and responding to clients' experiences, being aware of the discrimination and systemic racism that people face when accessing services, being anti-oppressive. We're brave, we challenge other agencies and ourselves, and constantly assess the work that we are doing. Being feminist, being assertive about the gendered nature of domestic abuse and challenging patriarchal norms. Being representative, so we have a staff team in Hackney that is reflective of the local community that we serve. Being inclusive, we offer services to all victims, survivors of domestic abuse, regardless of identity and characteristics. We're adaptive, so we're able to meet clients where they need to meet, either in their homes, in children's centres, religious settings. We can use advocates when needed. We can use interpreters when needed. We're holistic. We work in a multi-agency way, and we work with the multi-agency system that is around the client to ensure that their safety is maximised. And we're cooperative. We partner with other specialist agencies who can support casework where a client wants a specific service to meet their needs. And the last slide is routes to support. So there are the DIAS, Domestic Abuse Intervention Service details. And there are some additional organisations that exist in Hackney that work with particular groups of women. And that list that's a very, very small section of the list. It is a lot longer, and more details can be found on our Hackney website, and the detail and the link is below. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you for stepping in at such short notice, but also for laying out how the various intersectionalities impact experiences of abuse for women. Thank you. Our next speaker is Nasima, a specialist harmful practices IDVA or independent violence advocate officer with ICRO, a specialist women's rights organization. Nasima will be speaking and exploring FGM, forced marriage, so-called honor-based violence, and the support that's available.
Hiya, my name is Nasima, specialist in harmful practices, working with ICRO. First of all, I'm very glad to be here and to be able to speak about honor-based violence, FGM, and these are things I'll be exploring today. Just to let you know, you may feel a little bit uncomfortable at times, so just to let you know, I'm just going to give a brief overview of ICRO, the organization. I'm just going to jump straight into it then. So ICRO, the Iranian Kurdish women's rights organization, was first set up in 2002. It provides holistic advice and intensive care for women and girls at risk of honor-based violence, forced marriage, child marriage, and female genital mutilation and domestic violence. We specify to provide our services in various languages, in Arabic, Dari, Farsi, Kurdish, Sorani, and English. And since then, actually, since I've created this, we've added even more languages. We provide training for professionals, only women's groups, and communities to raise awareness for the above issues. Next slide, please. Seeing it as it is International Women's Day, just wanted to give a brief overview of our founder and executive director, ICRO. So Diana Nami is a campaigner from Kurdistan, Iran region. She has dedicated her life to campaigning for universal human rights. She has spent 12 years as a Kurdish freedom fighter and has been essentially very active in her politics, and has kind of taken on her issues and has also created this organization that has specifically aimed to support women who are at risk of certain cultural practices, which I will go into further. Next slide, please. Okay, so at ICRO, we aim to work with cultural relativism and within a cultural framework our members derive from. We specialize in supporting our clients in a cultural framework they feel comfortable with. So we provide an IDVA service, we work with the WISER project, Youth Advocacy Project, and what I specialize in is a harmful practice and FGM project. So we have a wide, sorry, one second. So we have a, so our member clientele are, I think, very reflective of London and kind of have, wait one second, please. Wait 1 second. Could I just jump onto the next slide, please? Okay, sorry. Okay, here I just want to talk a bit about the traditional harmful practices that we see a lot of our member clientele have been exposed to at risk of harm, and who come to our services dealing with domestic violence, but which have transpired in this way. So most harmful practices are traditional harmful practices deeply rooted in gender discrimination and stereotype that permits for these practices to continue within affected communities. So over the last decade, ICRO has been developing our assessment tools due to necessities, as we have seen an increase in disclosure in other harmful practices, which we did not think still exist today, or at least practiced here within the UK. And that's one thing I kind of want to dispel today also, is that although we assume that these harmful practices are practiced abroad, a lot of the times they are still practiced here within the UK. And so I've got a little list here of a lot of the harmful practices our clientele and members have come to seek help with. The main one being FGM, female genital mutilation, which I will explain a little bit about later on. Tasfih, which is a sort of symbolic FGM practice, rooted in more faith-based abuse techniques, which is, I would say, a force feeding, normally seen in Mauritius and in Western Saharan region, but still practiced here. Breast ironing, faith-based abuse, witchcraft, widow rituals, period shaming, and acid attacks. Next slide, please. So what I want to also stress is that these practices are all interlinked within power dynamics and control. And here I have something to kind of like symbolize the way in which they're all interrelated on the sheer fact that is, again, a form of power practice and power control. So a lot of our clientele often come to us with one form of harmful practices, but as we speak a bit more, we see how they are interrelated to other forms also. So we have FGM, so we have FGM there at the bottom, and FBA, which stands for faith-based abuse, forced marriages, and honor-based violence. So these are all practices, these are all forms of violence against women, but often when one woman has experienced forced marriage, she would have also experienced honor-based violence and FGM. So it's important that we understand how they interlink, but also to understand from there the cultural dynamics in which it kind of derives from, and how we can best support our members and women within the UK who are experiencing these forms of harmful practices. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so with FGM and honor-based violence, we need to understand, of course, the power dynamics in which they derive from, but the specificities of it. So we have patriarchal power, which is essentially control over women and girls and their sexuality. And this is, if we were to understand FGM, why it occurs. FGM is a form of controlling girls and denying them the right to a normal, healthy life. Not only is it that, but also a form of sexual control. It's a way of controlling women's sexuality. It reduces the woman's desire for sex and therefore controlling her sexual activity outside of marriage. And it's also rooted specifically in family honor. And it's a way of communities to avoid shame. So we can see how it also transpires as a form of community surveillance of women's sexuality. And not only is it, how would I say this? Not only is it a way of controlling women, but actually a physical barrier for women and their sexual activities. Okay, next slide, please. So what we have here It's just a brief definition of FGM. So FGM, so the official definition would be FGM stands for female genital mutilation, constitutes all procedures that involve partial or complete removal of external female genital organs for non-medical reasons. So it has no health benefits and harms girls in various ways. So it will lead to further medical issues, and not only that, but psychological issues, social issues. So not only is it a form of abuse physically to a woman, but we also need to understand the psychological and social elements of abuse it also carries. So there are different ways to that people speak about FGM, or kind of the terminology used. Some would call it female circumcision, operational or surgery, or female genital cutting, which a lot of our clientele may refer it to as. But we always use the term female genital mutilation to really specify the form of abuse it is, and to strip it away from any other sort of understandings. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so FGM is mainly carried out on young girls from infancy to adolescence. And we have cases in past in the UK where it was carried out as young as 2. Sometimes you will also have cases where women will get the procedure done a lot later on in their lives. The practice of FGM is often associated with African communities, but we have found that it happens all over the world. And it's important that we don't perpetrate stereotypes of certain communities in which it may derive from, but or mostly practicing, but to understand that any woman is at risk of it. And of course, through migration, FGM has spread to other parts of the world. So Canada, the US, New Zealand, we've even had cases in Russia. So yes, next slide, please. And while we talk about FGM, it's really also important to stress the so-called honor element of it, and to understand why it occurs. Often perpetrators are family members, mothers, fathers, and elderly members. But we need to understand that the cultural dynamics in which it derives from, and the sense and the kind of understanding which drives this practice. So in many cases, it is seen as a form of protection for women. It's seen as a way to kind of keep purity and so on. So, you know, we have cases where it will be mothers who are cutting their daughters. And for them, it really is a sense of protecting and kind of avoiding social outcasting. So it's important that we understand this dynamic also. From there, kind of breaking down these cultural understandings and kind of formulating it, and also engaging everybody within communities to kind of break this act. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I just quickly wanted to, because I'm a bit conscious of the time, to let you know that we, sorry, 1 second. We offer counselling services at ICRO, not only advice and advocacy, but counselling services for women who have experienced harmful practices. We offer them in various languages that I mentioned earlier, and we have one-to-one sessions, but we also do prefer having group counselling services, as it kind of creates a sense of solidarity with our members and clientele users. Yeah, next slide, please. And so we also offer training for professionals and different organizations also. And next slide. Sorry, I don't have control over it, so it's a bit awkward. We also have training sessions and workshops with local schools within London. I think is a great way for us to get people speaking from a young age and to create healthy discourse and find out to give younger women and girls the knowledge to kind of protect themselves and to also understand one another in better ways. Next slide. And something that we really try to stress and practice with ICRO are our community engagement groups. I think this is one of the most effective ways in which we can kind of create a sense of solidarity with women, with our members, and also to get a healthy discourse going in and finding out ways in which we can support one another in kind of finally ending violence against women and girls, and also creating I would like to say a small cultural shift and yes, really and bring us to the forefront the ways in which, you know, women can further empower themselves and kind of offer a more holistic form of empowerment. And what I'll do is that I'll end it there because I think if we go to the last slide, actually, the last slide, sorry. Oh, yeah, contacts. Here we have our 24-hour lines, but our lines here specific for Farsi and Dari speakers and Arabic and Kurdish speakers. There's always one at the other end of the phone, and our social media details here. And if you have any further questions, please visit our website or just send us an email and someone will get back to you. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Nasima. And for those that want more information, as Nasima said, please do visit ICRO's website. Our next speaker is Cecilia, who's an older women's IDFA with the NIA project. Cecilia will be exploring how discrimination against older women can increase and shape violence against women and girls, the responses to this, and the support that's available.
Thank you, Salma. I'm just going to get my slides up. Okay, so as Selma said, we're exploring how discrimination affects older women and how it shapes and increases violence against women and girls and the responses to this. It's just gone blank on my screen, so I'm just going to wait to see if it loads up.
We can see it, Cecilia, if that helps.
Yeah, I just don't know how it. I don't know if I can move forward, if that makes sense, because it's.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'll just give it a minute to see if it loads. Great, it's loaded. So really honoured to be part of this incredible panel as well before I move on. So if you don't know who NIA is, NIA provides services for women and girls who have been subjected to domestic abuse, and we have services in Hackney, Haringey, Barking and Dagenham. So I thought I could start off with some facts relating to older people and domestic abuse. So like younger women, older women may experience one or more types of domestic abuse, but age-related factors means that there are also some key differences. For example, older people are just as likely to be abused by an adult child as they are by an intimate partner. And in my caseload, I have 75% of clients who have violence perpetrated by their adult daughter or son. Almost half of older people experiencing domestic abuse or have a disability or mobility issue. All my clients have a disability or mobility issue. And an older person may find it difficult to report abuse or leave a relationship where their abuser is also their carer. So some key findings from the Femicide Census report 2020. So as you can see, women aged 66 plus, at least 22 women, so 20% of victims.
Sorry to disturb you, Cecilia. You're still showing the first slide.
Ooh.
If it's not working your end, we can present from our end. Would that help?
Yeah, that would help. I'm just going to stop sharing.
Okay, so just give us a second to set it up. Oh, there you go.
Right, okay. Sorry about that, everybody. And 12% of women killed were as a result of abuse perpetrated by victims. If I could have the next slide. The discrimination against older women. So firstly, I wanted to touch on assessment tools and paperwork not being focused. So for example, the DASH-RIC. It should include more questions in coercive control, emotional and psychological abuse, and financial abuse. The acknowledgement of coercive and controlling behaviour as part of domestic abuse of older women is very important. If consideration of coercion is not made, it could lead to missed opportunity to identify abuse and violence. Emotional abuse. Ask if anyone has upset them by talking to them in a way that has made them feel ashamed or threatened. So it's commonly experienced by older people, but often missed by professionals. It's important to consider if anyone has upset them by talking to them in a way that's felt ashamed or threatened, especially it occurs with child abuse perpetrated by an adult child, leading the victim to feel isolated and not engaging with the services. And we've also got financial abuse, one that's commonly missed. So these are some of the questions that can be asked. Next slide, please. So here we have a Duluth model, but it's specific to abuse experienced by older women, which is really useful. So we're often finding that we're using the power and control wheel, but I found this can be incredibly helpful. So here we're looking at abuse of dependency, ridiculous of values, manipulation of family, isolation, misuse of privilege, financial exploitation, and threats and intimidation. Next slide, please. Another form of discrimination is digital poverty, assumption that they can access resources and know about services. So a lot of clients have just a house phone, or they just have they don't have a mobile, and even when they have a mobile, they can't really hear properly, or they can't text. And so this leads them to feel quite isolated and have no communication with the outside world. And where the abuse has also been experienced for quite some time, they've never known a service for them in which to access as well. Then we've got refuges as well, housing. So for victims to flee to, they're not often accessible, and they've got shared facilities, and older women wouldn't like to live with lots of people. And then I think also it's really important to highlight the difference between elder abuse and domestic abuse. So identification of older people's experiences of domestic violence and abuse can be obscured by views about elder abuse, which does not necessarily recognise the gender-based attributes of domestic violence and abuse, and beliefs about traditional gender roles and practices that normalise the behaviours. Next slide. Responses. So what can we be doing? So training and education, training GPs, social services, carers, social prescribers, people who have interaction with older women. And because these professionals have interactions with older women, they might have a relationship which is long-standing, where the victim feels comfortable to disclose the abuse. Making the information available to older women, so having posters around community centres, activity centres, GPs, where older women might have appointments. And relevant tools, consider discriminations and barriers, ask beyond the DASH-RIC. So where the DASH-RIC doesn't ask those questions about coercion, control, financial abuse and emotional abuse, think wider than what's on the paperwork. And service provision, create an older women IDVA post. We can see that they have needs that are different to the IDVA post, and an acknowledgement that they need prolonged interventions. So it might take longer for them to disclose the abuse as it's been entrenched for quite some time. And partnership working, so the importance of coordination between different services and charity-based services. And then targeting the older people with specific materials and messaging, and don't assume that the services are available to them. And raising awareness, speaking about the topic, and funding for services. So as the violence and abuse against older women is increasing. Next slide. Supporting and overcoming barriers. So health and mobility affecting women to access services. So be flexible in where you provide the support, offer face-to-face, ask questions, and be curious, and break down that barrier of digital poverty. Limited eligibility for housing, legal, financial support. So knowing what options are available to your service users, knowledge on sheltered housing, the homelessness procedure, and also the right to request a community assessment for older people and carers. And where the perpetrator is an adult child or grandchild, the knowledge on adult child, grandchild, parent abuse, as I highlighted earlier, it's really prevalent. Linking with other agencies such as housing, mental health teams, drugs and alcohol services, and social services, and encourage third-party reporting. So a lot of parents who are survivors struggle to report the abuse out of fear of getting their son or daughter or even grandchild in trouble. So if you would like to refer or to speak further about a case, feel free to contact me, and my details are on the slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia, and please do get in touch with Cecilia and the NIA project if you want to find out more about how domestic abuse impacts older women. Next, I'd like to hand over to the Contextual Intervention Unit and Young Hackney, who will be doing a joint presentation setting out how racism affects Black girls and the actions being taken to address this, and the support available for young girls in Hackney.
Good morning, everybody. Happy International Women's Day. My name is Amy Holland. I'm a youth support and development worker from an early help and prevention unit in Young Hackney. I'm also here today with Ikmat Savage from the Contextual Safeguarding Unit. Ikmat, if you'd like to start.
Go ahead. So to start off our presentation, we were talking about adultification and how that impacts on young Black girls, and particularly in Hackney. So first of all, the contextual safeguarding is an approach to understanding and responding to young people's experiences of significant harm beyond their families. So it's recognizing that the different relationships that young people form in their neighborhood, schools, and online can feature violence and abuse, and parents and carers have little influence over the context and young people's experiences of extrafamilial abuse, and can undermine parent-child relationships. So we're looking at young Black girls and how they experience adultification due to being perceived as more adult-like, older than their age, which makes them more vulnerable. And this suggests that bias towards Black girls can lead to less protection and support. So when we're talking about adultification, we've got it defined as when notions of innocence and vulnerability are not afforded to certain children. So it's determined by people and institutions who hold power over children and young people. And when adultification occurs outside of the home, it always is founded within discrimination and bias. So when the local authority generically does an assessment, they focus on harm that's within the home. whereas the context intervention unit, our assessments usually focus more on the extrafamilial harm across locations, schools, and peer groups. Next slide. Next slide. So we were quite interested in a report that was done recently around 2022 by Claudia Bernard and Anna Carlisle. It's called Black Girls Navigate the Physical and Emotional Landscape of the Neighborhood, Normalized Violence and Strategic Agency. And they basically did an investigation, research with 14 to 19-year-old girls, and exploring how they navigate their public and private spaces. So we've got a couple quotes here where it's talking about that the violence that they experience as Black women in their neighborhoods was often overlooked. So professionals and community members overlooked what they were experiencing, whether it was to do with gangs or harassment on the street, and they were expected to just accept it or to be able to deal with it, and to deal with it maturely, as opposed to their peers who were the same age. So they talked about the fact that we need to understand the unique experiences of Black girls and Black women so we can better support and empower them, and be aware of their adultification and self-reflection, and being careful about language choices as our first steps, which might involve calling out how adults speak to and about children in the community. And they also talked about Black parents being very explicit when communicating with their children and other adults about the descriptions of Black girls' behaviour, pointing out the importance of correcting adults who use negative language to describe Black youth. So Amy will talk more about some of the responses that we had from young girls in Hackney, but basically from this research and from what we've also found, you can tell that the way that the young girls are perceived and the way that interacted with in the street and in the community is different to those of their peers, and it's being aware of this and thinking about how we can manage that. Next slide. So what can we do to create safety? Thinking about safety, it's cliche, but safeguarding is everyone's responsibility, and that's a key part of the CIU's work. So we're thinking about how we can make them not just physically safe, but mentally safe and culturally safe as well. You have to consider all aspects of their lived experiences, seeking to support them in different ways. So for example, if they are being harassed in the street, they feel comfortable to go into McDonald's and get support from someone in there. Or go into one of the local businesses and get support from some community members in there. That means that some of the work that we do from the CIU, such as working with local businesses, working with local schools, we're able to support them to develop mechanisms and resources so that they are able to have the knowledge to support these young people and have trusted adults across the community to help them feel safe. We also need to highlight the fact that when we consider safeguarding, it's not just about how they're physically safe, but how they're mentally safe, how they're culturally safe. So thinking about, are we creating enough spaces for them to share how they're feeling, to talk about these experiences that they're having? Many of the young girls that we spoke to spoke about wanting more of those kind of spaces where they can talk about their experiences with other young people who know what they're experiencing or have experienced it as well. And part of that is some of the work we are doing currently with Peabody in the Pembury area, where we're trying to create a young Black girls group where they can just have that opportunity to share and discuss their experiences and give them a platform for their voice, so that us as professionals and other community members can hear about that and support them to work forward with that. Alongside that, we're working with other teams such as Young Hackney and Integrated Gangs Unit, constantly engaging different leaders and locations across the community to build these practices in everyday safeguarding. So this includes linking with local businesses, as mentioned before, supporting schools to better understand the contextual experiences of our young people, and strengthening the connections between organizations to make sure all agencies are working together to safeguard our young girls, irrespective of the systemic prejudice or the bias that they are experiencing. So I think Amy has more of the context of how our young girls in Hackney are feeling.
Thank you, Itma. There will be a slide at the end which we will give reference to how you can get in touch with the Contextual Intervention Unit if you would like to find out more or make any referrals. So Young Hackney and the CIU Contextual Intervention Unit work together to create a questionnaire of 10 questions to gather the voices of some of our young women and girls aged between 13 and 22 years old to share with you today. The question asks for their views on how they felt being Black women or girls with relation to their safety in the community. Responses indicated a strong theme of fear and a need for protection. As stated, wanting to be treated fairly and a need for peace in the community. So on the slide that I'm sharing with you now, there's just some of the answers that we received back for this question. Next, we asked what racism meant to the young women and girls. The responses from this question indicated a strong sense of inequality, bias and unfair treatment, with one woman or young girl specifically stating that people were disrespecting her race or culture, and another specific example of hate crime based on the young person wearing a hijab and assumptions linked to terrorism. When asked whether the young women and girls felt that their experience of living in Hackney was different because of the colour of their skin, responses revealed that they have been treated differently and judgments have been made. One young woman perceived that they felt that the education system had lower expectations for Black girls and that the sanctions were different. Behaviour perceived was also different and there were harsher sanctions. For example, they're more likely to be excluded to their white counterparts. Finally, we asked what support the young women would like to see available to them in the borough, with a strong sense of targeted and specific support groups, more publicity and unity amongst women and girls and the wider community. This was just a snippet of the findings from the questions asked. I'm now going to play you an audio of an inspirational poem, Phenomenal Woman by Maya Angelou, chosen by some of the young women to play for you today. This has been read out by one of our phenomenal young women working with Young Hackney. The words have been outlined.
Phenomenal Woman by Maya Angelou. Pretty will wonder where my secret lies. I'm not cute or built to suit a fashion model size. But when I start to tell them, they think I'm too nice. I say it's in the reach of my arms, the spine of my hips, the stride of my step, the curve of my lips. I'm a woman phenomenal woman, that's me. I walk into a room just as cool as you please, and to a man, my fellows stand or fall down on their knees. Then they swarm around me, a hive of honeybees. I say it's the fire in my eyes, and the flash of my teeth, the swing in my waist, and the joy in my feet. I'm a woman phenomenal woman, that's me. Men themselves have wondered what they see in me. They've tried to so much, but they can't touch my inner mystery. When I try to show them, they say they still can't see. I say it's in the arch of my back, the sun of my smile, the red of my breath, the grace of my style. I'm a woman phenomenal woman, that's me. Now you understand just why my head's not bowed. I don't shout or jump or have to talk real loud. When you see me passing, it's out to make you proud. I say it's in the click of my heels, the bend of my hair, the palm of my hand, the need for my care, because I'm a woman phenomenal woman, that's me.
Amy, you're on mute.
So moving on to our last and final slide, just to say Young Hackney offers a targeted and universal service open to young people aged 6 to 19 and up to 25 if a young person has special educational needs or disabilities. We also offer a targeted LGBTQI+ and young carers group, substance misuse, health and wellbeing drop-in services, and school PSHE delivery. We also signpost and make referrals to clinical and therapeutic services. We have 2 main youth hubs open weekdays between 9 AM and 9 PM. We also have a sports hub and work with adventure playgrounds. Young Hackney pride ourselves on having friendly and approachable staff keen to support and promote the voices of our young people, including our young women. To see the breadth of Young Hackney and our wider offer, please refer to the information on the website for more information. These slides will be shared, so you will have the information accessible to you. Thank you for listening today and having us.
Thank you, Amy and Iknat, and thank you for sharing young Black girls' responses to your research and letting us know of the work being done to create spaces for them, and a special thanks to the young woman who read out that poem. Our next speaker is Councillor Carol Williams, Cabinet Member for Employment, Skills and Human Resources, and the lead for Member for Equalities. Councillor Williams will be speaking to Hackney's Council's commitment to equalities and addressing biases and discrimination.
Good morning, everyone. It's really good to be here and able to join you, and happy International Women's Day. I'm going to take this as an opportunity to give a quick overview of the Council's commitment to equalities and the work that we're doing to address biases and discrimination. As a borough, we recognise that too often when it comes to gender equality, women have been seen as a homogenous group. And this can be really unhelpful and mask key inequalities that persist between women. We know, for example, that intersecting protected characteristics means that Black and minoritised women, disabled women, women with caring responsibilities, LGBTQI women experience discrimination in unique ways. Achieving gender equality only partially addresses the discrimination and oppression faced by some women, and we have to mobilise every method to increase diversity. As a council, we put inequality of opportunity at the heart of the work that we do. And we are proud that Hackney Council was rated excellent on the Equality Framework for Local Government in 2013 and 2018. So let me just give you a quick overview of some of the work that the Council's been doing, where we are making progress to increase representation and diversity for women who have been traditionally underrepresented in some areas. I'd like to also just address what we are doing as a council to keep our own housing in order, talking about our workforce diversity, and hopefully what you'll have seen today is a demonstration of what it means to embed inclusive leadership principles at the heart of all of the work that we are doing in designing and developing public services. Increasing workforce diversity brings benefits for individual staff members, for the teams that they work in, as well as for the council and the residents that we serve. Our inclusive leadership programme aims to address the underrepresentation of Black and minoritised women, disabled staff at senior levels, and the need to protect the current gender equality at senior levels. From the Office of National Statistics, we know that the majority of families are heteronormative, consisting of cis men and cis women, and those statistics tell us that women are the primary caregivers, and that when women do work, they often work part-time. So what we have done, we've done a number of things to create a workforce where flexible working and part-time working becomes part of the norm for everyone, rather than just the norm for women with parenting and caring responsibilities. And it's a really important part of how we increase equalities and increase diversity at all levels across the organisation, so that we can develop policies that all of our residents can access. So that is why we've transformed our flexible working policy even before the pandemic, making flexible working part of a normal working practice. We have a suite of family-friendly policies, including paid dependency leave, an updated and modernised parental leave policy that gives time off for same-sex or heterosexual couples, adoption leave and leave for premature and sick babies. And before the pandemic, we developed and updated our menopause policy to ensure cis women and trans men feel safe accessing support in the workplace. We promote the employee voice and visibility through our staff networks and a Think Inclusive community network. And we engage with inclusive leadership champions in self-organised staff networks as well. We promote an inclusive leadership culture so that everyone thinks and leads more inclusively. And hearing everyone on the call talk this morning, it's been really clear just the impact that does have. This work is based on building a network of champions who lead conversations. So, for example, training videos and talks. They help design solutions, for example, diversifying contractor base, divisional workforce plans, and provide diverse perspective in recruitment processes, for example. So before the pandemic, or rather the pandemic forced us to force more of our staff to work from home. Hybrid working affords more flexibility, but we are also conscious that home working may hinder the careers of women in particular. They may want to opt for it, but because it's more convenient, but they may find themselves disadvantaged through a lack of access to formal networks. So as an employer, we have explored the potential benefits and disbenefits of hybrid working with a view to mitigating negative impacts. And we know that working from home presents challenges as well as opportunities, and that's why we developed a staff protocol to support staff who may be experiencing domestic abuse. So no presumption is made about working from home. Earlier in the presentation, Diane kicked off by mentioning the gender and ethnicity pay gap. So I do want to just quickly talk about those and explain why they are so incredibly important that we address them and why we close the gap. Reporting our gender pay gap is a legal requirement, and we have uploaded our data to the government website. Recent data shows that the pay gap that favours women employees, it's minus 1.24% as a measure of the mean, and minus 2.5% as a measure of the median. The average for the median values for local government indicates that in 2020, women were paid less on average than men. So Hackney, it bucks that trend and has done ever since we were first required to report our gender pay gap. Now, on the ethnicity pay gap, it's not a legal requirement, but we do know that due to structural and systemic racism, there is an ethnicity pay gap. So I thought it was really important for us to voluntarily calculate the council's pay gap and to report that on the council's website at the same time that we report our gender pay gap on the government website. This year's ethnicity pay gap shows a gap that favours white employees of 15.09% as measured by the mean and 12.94% as measured by the median. These figures were reported to full council last month. But I do want to add a word of caution, just to let you know that not all staff report their ethnicity, so there will be a margin of error, and that margin of error could be highly significant. But we have to have a baseline, and we do have a baseline from which we can work. On disability, we know that that is key too. And we have not yet developed a mechanism for calculating an accurate disability pay gap. That is work that I hope that we are going to do in the future, that we will be doing in the future, and we need to be able to understand how all of these figures intersect and how they impact women with multiple protected characteristics. And taken together, calculating our pay gap ensures we understand where our diversity gaps are and what we can do to develop action plans to close them. Increasing representation and embedding inclusive leadership approach through all of our policy work delivers outcomes like those that you've been hearing about this morning, where we can work with our partners to address domestic abuse, where we recognise that intersecting inequalities has a significant impact on the communities that we represent and serve, and that we can address those, delivering the service, targeting services where it is needed. Having women at the top of the organisation and women from minoritized communities, the global majority, means that we can focus on those areas and we can become a council that not only puts inclusion at the forefront of all of our equalities work, but that we can make a real change and difference in the lives of Hackney residents. I'd like to thank you all for the incredible work that you have been doing, for the presentations that you have given this morning, and for being so committed to ensuring that we have a great programme of activity for International Women's Day, showing the importance and significance that we treat this piece of work with. Can I also thank Councillor Fajana Thomas for her incredible leadership in this area. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. And next, our last speaker is Councillor Fajana Thomas, Cabinet Member for Community Safety, who will speak to Hackney Council's commitment to eliminating violence against women and girls.
Thanks very much, Selma, for hosting the event today, and thanks to my colleague, Councillor Williams, who just spoke. Can I just say Happy International Women's Day, and thanks to everyone that has taken the time to join us today. As I've been introduced, I'm Councillor Susan Fajana Thomas. I'm the Cabinet Member for Community Safety. I lead the Council's work to end violence against women and girls. And as you are aware, today's event, in terms of breaking the bias, we are focusing today's program on intersectionality and violence against women and girls. And I'm taking this opportunity as the lead member around eliminating violence against women and girls, just to reaffirm the Council's commitment in this area. Proud of the work we are doing as a council around gender-based violence. Proud of the way we are working with, even prior to the anti Black Lives Matter motion that was adopted in 2019 by the council. We have Hackney continue to ensure that work around discrimination, and we continue to do that. Discrimination, hate crime, misogyny is no place in Hackney, and it is important to us that our women and girls are safe in Hackney. Thanks to all the speakers, we've heard from all your various species how women and girls can face a number of intersecting prejudices that overlap and multiply to create complex harms. It is an enduring truth that while all women experience an unequal society, for many of us, that inequality is compounded because of our religion, our ethnicity, our sexuality, disability, or being transgender, being older, being younger, or having no recourse to public fund, and sometimes in this part of the world for having English as a second language. Hackney Council and our partner agencies, many of them have spoken today, acknowledge the barriers faced due to intersectionality, and we are working to resist bias and violence against women and girls. We are breaking bias by reducing the disproportionate harm experienced by minority groups, as well as making our services accessible to all women. You heard from Nikki earlier on when she was talking about the domestic abuse intervention services and or the model of how we deliver services within the council. Women are entitled to be safe in their home as well as in our public spaces. It remains a terrible fact that for many women, relationships and family are places of gender oppression and danger for them. We know from available research that almost 1 in 3 women aged 16, between the age of 16 and 59, will experience domestic abuse in a lifetime. We know that Black and minoritized women often suffer more severe abuse for longer and face more challenges to accessing support than their white counterparts. I want to make this clear that if you are a woman in Hackney who is being hurt or threatened by a partner or an ex-partner or a family member, you are not alone. The Council's Domestic Abuse Intervention Service, we hear you, we value your life experience, we take account of your complexity as an individual, we fight for your right, we challenge discrimination against you, and we work with other agencies to protect you from harm. Our services exclude no one and helps everyone. We have conducted an extensive consultation. Many of you took part in the public realm consultation on women's safety between December and January this year. And at the moment, we are responding as a whole partnership by tackling the environmental factors, challenging male behavior, and improving our analysis to target resources in a way that addresses problematic male behavior wherever it occurs. This will take time and hard work, but we are committed to meaningful change. And I say this as individual. Hackney Council, we are committed to challenge discrimination in all forms. And as individual out there, I will ask you to reflect on how in your own personal and professional life you can make real the anti-racist, anti-discriminatory, and feminist approach we have discussed today. I thank all our speakers, our lead officer, Kaharan, for the work he's done to put today together. And to my colleague, Councillor William, thank you again for the support, for working together to put today's program together. Finally, to all our partners in Hackney that is helping us to tackle violence against women and girls, I say thank you. And to some of you that have contributed as speakers to this event, thanks very much. Finally, thanks to everyone that have joined us to listen to the Hackney Council's International Women's Day 2022 celebration. Thank you all.
Thank you, Councillor Farhana Thomas, for for setting out Hackney Council's commitment to eliminating violence against women and girls, and for bringing today's event to a close. I'd also like to take this opportunity in following Councillor Farhana Thomas and Councillor Williams in thanking all of our speakers today, not only for their presentations, but also for the important work that they do and the help they give to women and girls in the London Borough of Hackney. I'd also like to thank you for attending today's event. I hope that our speakers' presentations have raised your awareness of the many challenges and biases that women and young girls face, and that this has inspired you all to act in some way. Please do contact our speakers today for more information. I believe today's slides will be shared with those of you that have joined us today and partner agencies. Finally, I'd like to remind you to use the links to support and resources included in the invitation, as well as the holding slide that will be displayed, or which is displayed right now, actually. And on that note, I wish you all a very happy International Women's Day, and thank you again for joining us.